Hello and welcome to the recording of Implementing Pharmacogenetic POCT Devices Nationally webinar. Our expert speaker, Ryan Cooper, National Point of Care Testing Lead, Point of Care Testing Programme Clinical Directorate, NHS National Services Scotland, explores the national rollout of pharmacogenetic POCT devices and their transformative potential to reduce inequity and deliver personalised care. For further free content, please visit www.sbk-healthcare.co.uk. Thank you, and I hope that you find this webinar is educational and enjoyable.
So I'm going to talk about the national rollout implementation of pharmacogenetics, which will include main focus on the point of care element of that across NHS Scotland. I, as Marianne introduced, the point of care testing lead within the National Services Scotland. So presentation today, I'll go over some background and structure of what NHS Scotland is, the innovation pathways, and a bit of the project details as well and how it arrived at NHS Scotland. Some challenges and some bits about the testing process, and I presented a similar presentation at near the end of 2025. So now that we're further on in the implementation, there's some updated slides and updated information from that. So NHS Scotland is made up of 14 territorial boards, and those are boards that have hospitals, A&Es and such like, and we've got the 3 island boards that are part of that 14 on the north and northwest of the country. There's 8 specialist boards within the NHS Scotland framework. I'm part of NHS, the National Services Scotland, and we're working in partnership with some of the other ones for this project too, which I'll name check as and when they come up throughout this presentation. The new innovation, I would say, mindset in NHS Scotland is recognising all the major partners that have been in and around innovation for a while, but I would say probably historically the innovation within the NHS in Scotland and certainly within diagnostics has been more on a board by board basis and not as collaborative as this pharmacogenetics project has been. So bringing together all these individual partners into one pathway is what this pharmacogenetics project has been used for. So this is about the 5th or 6th project that this pathway has been used for. Previous ones include digital dermatology and ScotCap and some other diabetes prevention networks. So the IDA is one of the main decision points, and it works similar to how it worked during the pandemic as well, where we had that sort of UK UXA approach where there was a sort of central decision making about devices and their appropriate use, etc. So Scotland's included some of these aspects into this pathway now, and I'll explain what the pharmacogenetics one comes from. So the Centre for Sustainable Delivery, CSFD, and the ANYA, just to explain the acronyms, the Accelerated National Innovation Adoption, those exist within the one of the specialist boards and out of the Golden Jubilee Hospital, which is in Clydebank, just next to Glasgow. It's funded through the Chief Scientist's Office, and this is all in partnership with Scottish Government. It's all trying to lead out from that central process, some more control, I would say, from Scottish Government and influence. And I think over the last 12 months, but predominantly the last 6, I would say there's definitely been that feeling that these 10-year plans that we're seeing government release of all the developed nations is now starting to have that impact of, at the end of each sentence, of good practice or new innovations. Is this scalable? Can this be rolled out further, implemented wider in our health system? So ANYA has 2 main aims, that identification of new technologies. And I think the key bit in there is the evidence base, because that's very pertinent to the pharmacogenetics one as well, where there's clear evidence base that this innovation works, and that focus on then implementing nationally and rolling out the pathway across Scotland. So a bit of a timeline, and there's some slow badges there from our manufacturers that are involved in this as well within NHS Scotland just now. So April 23, NICE produced some guidelines introducing that genetic test in newborn babies to prevent deafness from that ototoxicity from aminoglycoside antibiotics. The project that we're running generally refers to as gentamicin, but gentamicin is part of this wider aminoglycoside antibiotic group. Gentamicin is just the first line that NICE recommend. So Anya were given the instruction to create that value case. There's a short part before this that I'll show on one of the next slides about that those gateways in innovation, and the value case is not the first. There's a short strategic case is given to the Scottish Government to approve then the next gate, which is this value case. The value case is created through creating a project team, and a project team made up of all the relevant stakeholders that would feed into that value case, given the background through the whole patient journey as well, which was really interesting from being in innovations and projects in the past that may feel quite silo and maybe targeted to one area and not taking in that full patient journey. Pharmacogenetics and the way it assured the funding and created what those costs to the NHS are, not the department necessarily that would be doing the testing or the area, which I think previous innovations have missed a bit. The evaluation of that whole patient pathway, I think, was very important for the pharmacogenetics. And yes, I've highlighted there that no IT was part of this group, and I'll explain more about that soon, because I keep looking for IT and more IT involvement, but yeah, I'll explain that as it goes on. The Anya gates, the stage gates I was referring to there in the strategic case. So yes, there's a bit of horizon scanning at the very beginning, and the strategic case is a short paper to Scottish Government to give them a heads up of what should be considered and what's coming to the innovation space. And that value case in the middle there was where I was involved initially and asked to come onto that group to then bring some of the information around point of care testing from my role in the point of care testing program into that value case. And yeah, very interesting experience to hear it from all the clinical pathways, because that value case was included for MTRNR1 for the neonatal deafness test, and also the CYP2C19 test that's related to the stroke pathway in this conversation. But in the implementation phase now, so that 1 to 3 year period with constant project monitoring, and I'll explain more of that monitoring later on in the slides. And then we'll be part of, there's some drafts already started to create what those benefits realization review would look like. So like any project or any change, doing that effectiveness check at the end is a very key part. So looking forward to seeing that benefits realization. And I guess that'll be what will be really useful for other countries around the world as well that haven't introduced or implemented pharmacogenetics across their whole health system. So as I mentioned, the dual value case wasn't normally how it would happen. I think in days gone by, the value case would be separated, one for the MTRNR1 point of care and one for the CYP2C19, with being from two different pathways, patient pathways. And it was recognised that the CYP2C19 point of care was an option as well. The target for that was not to roll out directly or immediately like the MTRNR1. The MTRNR1 just got the approval to get rolled out immediately, so no trial, which would have happened in the past. Each board probably would have trialed it in the past. So being able to trust evidence enough to be able to write a value case for the immediate implementation of a test is certainly the first time I've been part of something like that or know about that type of process and diagnostic tests throughout my career. The criticality of each test, I think, was key in that decision as well. MTRNR1, there is a lab test for it, and neonatal wards could request that test now and have been able to for some time. That lab test takes several days to be returned, certainly 48 hours minimum, I would say, to be returned round back to that requester. The antibiotic use for neonatal intensive care babies is within a golden hour. The golden hour, I don't think there's an origin of where that's from, but certainly an hour was used as that we would administer as neonatal staff antibiotics to those babies within an hour. So the lab test could not be used here. That's why the acuity of the test is why point of care has to be used for MTRR1. The CYP2C19, I will focus more on MTRR1 throughout this project, but just a bit of background about the CYP2C19. It's not got the same acuity. I think that's probably the difference. I don't think there was a great collaboration from all stroke consultants in that patient pathway about how urgent they need that test. So again, going back to some of those point of care principles about, is there a need for this test? What's the need for the test? And does it need to be point of care, or can it be lab test within the pathway? What effect is that going to have on the management of those patients? So it was estimated about 80% of neonates. So the difference with the PALO UK research study that's going on, PALO UK tests all babies that come into the neonatal intensive care unit. The project in Scotland was, there wasn't an open purse of funds for this project. It still had to be within a certain frame, limit, I'm sure. I certainly had that feel through going through the project. So it was estimated that not all babies would need tested because not all babies would receive antibiotics or be considered for antibiotics in the neonatal intensive care. So the 80% figure was brought out then, and data was looked at in Scotland around the prescribing habits, how much gentamicin is actually prescribed in these areas. So different parts, and then the cochlear implant team, of course, which are involved in the babies who unfortunately do lose their hearing and then are managed through that service. Data was gleaned from them about how many babies that we'd be talking about. So I've highlighted those about 3,500 tests in Scotland were planned to be used across the various neonatal intensive care units. I will come back to those tests and one of the slides later on as well. So as part of the ANYA process, the landscape, it's called landscape exercise. So it's essentially going out and asking each health board within NHS Scotland if they would be happy to take on this test within their board, and also seek out some local resource that might be able to assist that implementation as well. Notably, local laboratories and medical laboratories. Is there resource within that health board that could help that in the implementation, but also as business as usual? So some of those business as usual plans were made and estimates were made at this early stage. So when the chief executives were reviewing this from each health board to approve or not, they had an idea of what their board's cost is going to be when it moves out of implementation phase into business as usual. So it won't surprise many on the call, I don't think, that some gaps were identified with local health board resource. And the point of care resource specifically was very different across each health board. Some boards had some boards didn't. And that led to a bit of head scratcher initially from the project team as a whole. Obviously, it wasn't news to myself. We'd seen something very similar through the COVID pandemic as well, where we had learned that the distribution of devices and the testing that happened during COVID maybe wasn't the most optimal, but some of the barriers that were there definitely included resource as well. So the value case quickly started to think about how we're going to help that resource throughout this implementation phase and get the project moving through these time scales that are given. And the value case then selected that there would be 2 national point of care coordinators recruited into the team for the length of the project. So the 18-month project was set, and they would be a temporary fixed post. And again, just to reiterate that IT, and I guess why there was no IT team included in the initial value case project team was because IT connectivity was ruled out of the project scope early on. So I was brought into the project, and there'd already been, the strategic case that's made before the value case, certainly made estimates for the IT connectivity and the sort of region of about £500,000 to cover the whole of Scotland. I originally automatically thought that seems very inflated, but I think looking at quotes and such like since from the products that are on the market, yes, I could see that probably wouldn't have been too far off the mark, but I still think slightly higher than what it would have looked like for this specific project. But I was ruled out. So in February 25, that's Scottish Government approved the value case. So it was a triple, detail in that value case. The one project that I'm part of is the MTNR1 rollout to 11 health boards. So that works out as 17 sites, because some of our health boards have more than one neonatal intensive care unit, the larger boards that we have in Glasgow and Edinburgh, for instance. The three island health boards up on the north and the northwest weren't included in this rollout because the way they manage patients before this project is that the babies that would be classed in neonatal intensive care are flown to the mainland to be treated. So there was no need to test in the island boards as the patient pathway was already set. So the CYP2C19 lab-based testing was approved within that value case as well. So Scotland has 4 genetics labs, and 2 of those genetics labs were given funding to do CYP2C19. So all 14 boards in the stroke pathway will be sending samples to one of the 2 labs who do CYP2C19. And then that third element, the point of care element of the CYP2C19, the North Innovation Hub. Scotland has 3 innovation hubs, the North, West and East, and it was the North one that had taken on this test of change for the point of care element. So they've put the gene drive devices into 2 remote and rural health boards, Elgin being the remote and rural part of NHS Grampian, that's main hospitals in Aberdeen, and the Western Isles, which is on the northwest coast of Scotland. So that project is a 12-month trial, and that will make the comparison between the board sending the CYP2C19 to one of the 2 labs and the comparison to having point of care right there now, which the test could be done within 30 minutes. So an 18-month phased implementation for MTNR1, and we had the goal for that first site to be live by October 25. So it sort of officially started April 25, and we had 6 months of recruiting into the various posts throughout the project team, which was clinical staff, project management staff, and the 2 point of care coordinators that were recruited into my team within the National Services Scotland. And they started on the 8th of October. So we had other aims because this was a national rollout, and we didn't want to do everything 14 times, or in this case, 11 times. So the data protection impact assessment and DPIA was created nationally as we were rolling out the same equipment without connectivity to the same locations as well in the neonatal wards. The DPIA could be done once and then replicated easily in the boards because the clinical governance in NHS Scotland is still devolved to each of the 14 health boards individually as their own entities. So DPIAs would still have to be signed off in each of the 14 boards, 11 in this case, but that process still exists. But we thought trying to get ahead up on creating it, so not all 11 boards had to create it from scratch, would save some time. And then the aim to have national training and competence process, would seem quite logical to most as well. So train staff the same across all the boards that are involved in the testing. And then Scottish Government have KPIs that they ask of the project to report in regularly. So creating a national governance framework and monitoring framework for this as well was very important. So several of those aims fell into my remit as point of care team. We went from 1 to 3, which is quite nice. So this just gives a bit of a schematic there about the coverage over Scotland. The number in the blue stars are the amount of devices at on each site. So just over there in the west, the 8th is Glasgow, our largest site, and then the 4 is Lothian and Edinburgh. So they're 2 largest boards, and then most boards will have 2 devices. So we want to double up the devices, so there was a bit of a contingency there, as this test is needed 24/7, 365, any time of the day. So we didn't want to just roll out one machine. So each board has a minimum of 2 machines. So the team of 3 and the National Point of Care testing team, we cover that patch, and we'll remember what I said earlier about the no IT connectivity as well. But for a bit of fun, certainly when I was presenting down at Congress and having colleagues like yourselves from all over the UK, I sort of transposed that coverage, that geographical coverage to other parts of the UK, just as a bit of comedy. Yes, that coverage is without IT connectivity, as that was out of scope. So we definitely were able to identify some challenges pre-implementation as well. The IT connectivity was there, obviously, as a challenge that was ruled out, so that wasn't in consideration. But the IT systems where the patient record will be stored as well had to be investigated in each health board. They all use something slightly differently as well. There's some common systems, but each board sort of uses it slightly differently. You know, things like BadgerNet were mentioned for use in the neonatal wards. Each board's got a slightly different version. It's like a bit of a half and half in Scotland. Half have got it as a full electronic record for the patient, and some just have it as a sort of light version of BadgerNet. So we couldn't just instill the result goes here, there, and have one size fits all. And the importance of the MTNR1 test in babies, if they are found to have the gene, that has to be on their record for the rest of their life, because all future prescribing opportunities that they'll have throughout their adulthood, certainly the teenhood as well, where we still see teenagers losing hearing as well. That has to be flagged up from any sort of healthcare setting, whether it be primary care, pharmacy. Anybody that's taking that decision to prescribe antibiotics should see on that patient that there's a flag, there's a do not prescribe gentamicin in the wider aminoglycoside antibiotics, and to use an alternative. So yes, the data extraction is a standalone process, and we are at the moment using our own NHS supplied mobile phones to extract the data. There is some talk in each health board that some do want to connect, but obviously it won't be part of the project. They would have to fund that themselves. And one of the options of the gene drive, which is fully connectable, that's not the device that's caused this not to be included. One of the options is to use a secure file transfer, so not a full journey for the result from device to patient record, but a way that you could electronically and automatically take those files from the device to a secure storage-based file structure within your board. At the beginning, we weren't sure about the verification material that would be used for this either. We've been quite a new test. Some manufacturers were creating this as we were doing the value case, so it was very difficult to put a figure to this, and I couldn't put a figure to this in the value case. So I had to go back once, EMQN, one of the partners in this project that have EQA schemes for genetics already. We're creating one for this MTNR1 and CYP2C19. So once that was available and we had the details, we were able to put those costs together, and I had to go back to Scottish Government cap in hand and ask for another 6 figures to deal with the verification and subsequently the EQA costs. So there was an EQA scheme set up, and that's now available for MTNR1 point of care, and there's verification material that could be used for the verification. So very useful, and it's very close to the patient result as well, the patient test. So it's very useful. It's not, it doesn't need reconstituted or anything like that. It's a dry swab. So the one bit that's missing is swabbing the patient's mouth, which the neonatal staff are very used to doing. The test cost compared to other point of care tests was certainly a feature. These genetic tests are more expensive than a blood glucose, a urine dipstick, any other sort of point of care test you could think. So that had to be taken into consideration, and that's where the sort of estimates for each board, how much they were going to test, that's how the funding was arranged, was X board will test X amount. based on the gentamicin prescribing, etc., and the amount of neonatal babies going through the wards, they had an estimate of how much each port would do. So funding was done from that. The national monitoring that I mentioned in the previous slide, there wasn't really a process for national monitoring. We had bits of it during COVID pandemic when we were all sort of speaking on a one voice more, but there's no process I could just access and say, this is how we monitor this test. So we're working this up as we go along, growing as we see the data and see how it could be managed and see how it could be extracted from the testing devices. And with this being a relatively new test, genetics isn't known for point of care, so the knowledge around genetics point of care wasn't really widely distributed at all. So all of us were sort of learning as we go along. Health boards being ready for that early phase as well was certainly seen as possible barrier there. Trying to get the people who will be running this test, who may be overseeing the governance of this test, really difficult to get them to engage early on. And obviously, we're speaking about the point of care coordinators, and in this sense, recruiting into temporary fixed roles. I'm sure others on the call that have done this during the pandemic will know the difficulties of hiring fixed posts. And then we had to estimate BAU costs, and those probably underestimate now, seeing what the projects look like and seeing what it looks like in practice. But those costs had to be brought together somehow. But those costs didn't include resources. It only included what the testing is going to cost each health board, like the business as usual. And just clinical is not my background. I'm a biomedical scientist trade, so doing the more technical aspects of the testing. But from what I've picked up from the clinical team and from on site and pre-project, there was definitely a bit of an uncomfortableness between neonatal staff and the consultants within that area about testing some babies. So having a criteria, I mentioned 80% in the early slides. I think as I got closer and they started thinking about what this would look like on a practical sense, having a baby that was under their care that wouldn't be tested and testing one that was in their care that met more of the criteria wasn't really sitting well with the general population within neonatal care. So most of them in the go live meetings would say actually most get antibiotics. 80% is probably an underestimation. And there's different processes across the country as well, with the names NICU, SCIBU, and LNU, and the postnatal, etc. The way they manage babies within that children's ward, I guess we could use, or that neonatal ward is different. But generally, there's a commonality of the clinical staff manage them all. So the project was looking at a very specific NICU baby cohort because of the research, and that's what come out of the paleo research, really. That would be the best cohort to have the better impact. So we've got that monitoring the budget that was given to each health board over the 12-month period, which was aimed at as being the time that they would get 12 months funding locally from the Scottish Government. So we're managing that as we go, because I think some boards are going to use that budget and that funding before the 12 months. So business as usual will have to be instigated quicker than 12 months. And then other bits, because it affects so many different systems and so many different stakeholders, there's local antimicrobial resistance groups, pharmacies, pathways, existing antibiotic strategies anyway. So all that has to be discussed and changed and agreed in the right local processes. And then those, as I mentioned about the results, having that result visible across multiple systems. It's not just focusing on the result, getting on the electronic patient record. It has to be somewhere that's visible at all these future prescribing opportunities. So in the Paleo UK study, I think they'd attached it to patient record as an analogy. And obviously, babies less than 28 days don't have much of an immune system. But that was the only place that would flag it appropriately. So I think that's still probably an evolving theme, and I think the Paleo UK as well are evolving their results systems that they manage. So this is the point of care team heading off into our large geographical area to start implementing and verifying these devices. So Scotland designed their own verification strategy So it was to cover about 31 devices in total. And that's doing 10 tests as a primary verification, which includes two controls, two of the manufacturer controls, and using those EMQN DVS samples as our external material to challenge the performance of that. And the EMQN samples have a wild type high and low cell load, and the actual MTRNR1 gene variant as well. So they're wild type and a variant. And the testing would be over 2 days on a primary one, and ideally done by two different members of staff, just to throw in some of that variation that could happen just from normal practice. We were offering to do verifications, and labs that are able to be involved with the rollout of this as well and implementation could also offer to do the verification. But I was keen, once I saw the nature of the tests and the sample, to this an opportunity for the staff to use the test because it's so similar to the patient test. So we've actually involved a lot of the staff training as the verification as well. So the verifications actually had a lot of variation added to challenge it as well, instead of just that two different people testing over 2 days. Secondary verification, that could happen for a number of different reasons. We've just had one. So the email comes through and tells you you have a notification of change, which is very nice. But this is normal practice with any manufacturer. So this is something that's probably good at this point in time within the project, because we're having to manage how those change control, however term you use for this type of process, and basically ascertain what kind of level of verification is needed for the change that's happened. The recent change is actually a key part of the test kit, the ID kit, the license buffer that's been changed. So, but quality control, it's actually the company advised to do it monthly. I think that's appropriate. And I think a good point to raise for budgeting and raising the value case or business case in your own areas is the QC uses one ID kit as well. So you don't buy QC and you can test QC on its own. The QC is bought separately, but the ID kit is used for each QC as well. So that's something we didn't realise when we were building up the funds and the budgetary claims. So it's one negative and one positive, and it could be done either both together on a monthly basis, or you could choose to do one every fortnight if you want, one of t'other every fortnight. And that's only advanced users that are trained to do the QC. The other users are just doing the test. So there's two separate training levels there that I'll go on to speak more about as well. So that standardized training, we say obviously to use the manufacturers as much as we can. So the manufacturer offered to do 1 day on site, face-to-face training with staff, where they'll go through a number of test kits, practice kits, and the two levels that I mentioned there briefly. The advanced users have the testing for QC and test, and they have the training to use the menus within the device as well. A lot of that, mainly on a day-to-day basis, will be adding and removing users, but there are different settings within the device that are run through the administration. So the advanced users given administration access, where the standard users are just trained to test and they don't have access to but they can use the original barcodes. So some of them have barcodes for blood gas and such like already. So the machine could take that and you could add people in with their barcodes, so they don't need a separate one. And that access is granted for 12 months. Training records, we keep a copy as well, but we do keep the copies of and I should have said in the previous slide, the verification records, we're storing them as well, just as full proof really, but each of the copies of these are given to the individual staff, and verification stored within the local health board as well. And that future reference that I mentioned there for retaining point of care team and the training is that ongoing governance. So we're monitoring the number of failed tests. There could be a member of staff that fails more than one other. So it's just checking these testing data to make sure the training was appropriate. And if somebody needs retrained early, or some level of intervention, then we'll have that. But generally, it should be 12 months before they have to redo some training. So it sounds very easy, but it is like spinning plates a lot of the time. There's a lot of staff involved in this too, and as you go through implementation phase by phase, it's we're coming to the end of phase one just now, and we've had 3 sites we implemented in Greater Glasgow and Clyde first, the largest health board in Scotland, and they've got 3 sites. So it's been a bit like having 3 health boards at once with having 3 sites, but it's been good to see that interaction between the 3 sites within the same board. And there's when you've implemented in one, they don't stop then contacting you. So the phased approach on a Gantt chart, it looks very much like start and stop, but the more people that have got live training are certainly going to have issues cropping up and troubleshooting and questions for the team. So we expect there'll be a constant involvement of our experience in this area. So some other ones that we've found during implementation now that we're out on the road, the space in the NATO wards isn't as much as we would like at times. They're sort of forced to put it in places typically where there existing blood gases as well. The call off contracts and those official documents that need different people to approve in each health board has caused some delays. That's delayed some training. And then just the availability of the staff. We're in neonatal intensive care wards. They can't ring fence staff even with the best will in the world. You plan to go in and train, anything could happen. Like most departments, people could be called away. The demand on them could be higher when you're trying to train. So we're very flexible about when we'll be there on site and when we won't be. But those existing blood gas machines can cause a bit of confusion because when point of care gets used as a single term, people think all the machines get used the same, and there are subtle differences between them all. So we've created this national SharePoint site, and this is accessible by everybody who's part of the project. They can ask for access, and all the users on the boards can access this site. And we've got 2 options there for the 2 different projects. Our quality management system with the point of care teams created a list of documents that you would typically see in a laboratory service for a diagnostic test. And that's one to give them a bit of a start with documents so they don't have to create them themselves, but also try and set a bit of a standard process because we do have boards that won't have any lab input at all. And we're not sure how long the point of care team will be in use, but it's only termed to be until the end of the implementation phase. So some next steps, and I've put some of the ones that we've completed or won or taken some pride in and credit on because I think that's important through a project of this length as well. Sometimes you could want to wait till the end of a project to take some credit, but I think it's important to take the credit along the way. So we have trained the point of care coordinators that are employed and recruited into our service. We've created documents in the QMS at no cost because SharePoint doesn't cost anything, unlike some of the other quality management system softwares. There's some bits that are still done. I would say we've created training. We've not finalised the sort of competency framework yet. We're still working with our colleagues in the National Education for Scotland team to do that competence. What will happen at 12 months or if staff need trained earlier than that, if they have a long absence per se within that 12 months as well, or a high failure rate, what's going to happen. We've not fully finished that, and I think we're still designing all the sort of quality assurance bits of that too, working with 11 different devolved clinical governance structures. The audit program will do. I've got very keen eyes for audit and assessment with previous roles I've been in. So when I go back on site, my eyes are all over the place trying to see how they're doing, how stock's managed, how lots of different things are being managed within the service. So we'll do some formal audit as we get through the phased implementation. And one of my main aims that I'll always have on the project as well, and hopefully won't have forever, is making a case for that point of care resource in Scotland with an aim to have some national policy for NHS Scotland. So thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Some thanks to some of the colleagues from Anya and GeneDrive for their support. the board that employ me in the point of care program, the point of care coordinators, and the national point of care steering group members. That's a group of point of care stakeholders and wider in hospital at home and Scottish Ambulance Service that we evolved from the COVID pandemic. So it's a good group for sharing this type of thing, for moving the agenda along for point of care in Scotland. And thanks to SPK for the opportunity to present this afternoon. And we'll see you in March for the face-to-face as well, which is really good. Lots of other people to thank, but thanks. And happy to take some questions.
Well, thank you so much, Ryan, for delivering such an insightful webinar. I hope everyone has found it really useful. So as Ryan mentioned, we have some time now for some questions and answers. So if anyone has any questions and answers, please can they go in the Q&A box. If we just go through them now. So our first question, was there consideration from trusts on moving to alternative first-line antibiotic rather than implementing the test?
I think some of them, I mentioned it before about the different strategies, some of them do actually use cefotaxime as their main antibiotic, but there's obviously, there was definitely chat around that antimicrobial resistance and using one only. But yeah, I'd raised the point about what happens in a contingency if you don't have a test and both machines go down for whatever reason, or electric goes out or something of that magnitude where you don't have the testing available. They may use cefotaxime, and it's certainly something even where if you have a failed test, so the test runs 26 minutes essentially, it takes 5 to 10 minutes depending on your your use with the test to set up. You think about from swabbing the patient. So if a test fails, it tells you at the end of the test. It doesn't tell you at the start if there's not enough DNA on the swab, for instance. It goes the whole length of the test, then fails. So to do another one where you're working within an acuity like a neonatal intensive care, the baby might be really ill and can't wait on that second test or even the first test. So it was mentioned at the very start about you could potentially put them on cefotaxime where there's an immediate need, and then if the test is completed and it's negative, for instance, or the not detected for the gene, you could then revert back to gentamicin. So there was a lot of chat about that antibiotic use. But I don't think any site, although there are some that do it, I think they're not graded as NICUs, but there are children's wards that just solely use cefotaxime. But yeah, I think most were aiming to use the first line gentamicin. That's where a lot of the stats had come from. But no, to answer the question in a long-winded way, there wasn't the decision just to use cefotaxime without using point of care.
Amazing, thank you. Another question here. Now you have implemented, are the local POCT teams taking over the oversight of the devices, or will ongoing oversight / support be provided at a national level?
So the first part of that is no. The local labs so far, or local point of care teams, but generally they would be in laboratories, aren't looking to take over it yet. A lot of them are involved in the calls. They're involved in the chat about it coming to their board, but a lot of them just simply don't have the time. There's a national LIMS project in Scotland, for instance, so you're asking the same people to do 5 jobs over their normal jobs. So we're keeping them aware. There's obviously local processes for point of care committees and things where if you were bringing in a new service, you would fill out one of their performers so they know what's coming in rather than it all being unknown and the sort of Wild West version. But they want to be involved. They're just really stuck by their own resource. They can't just take on new things easily. So we're hoping through this project, evidence will be created. Boards will be able to put business cases in for the ongoing testing, but also resource to support that too. But yeah, the second part of that, I still think with what's on the horizon and what the 10-year plans pose for healthcare in the UK, there could be and should be probably a national resource there as well. Because I think that's got a function. and it's not necessarily central control of everything. That's probably what I would say, because that's sometimes what that means at times, that this national team will control everything. It's not that. I think it's a facilitation, I think, how I see it. I think there's a lot that could be facilitated from a national team to support those local teams, yeah. But it's still very patchy. The point of care resource is still really patchy. We've got boards that don't have any at all, so we're implementing this test knowing there won't be any lab input at all. So, yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So we have another one here. Do staff have a practical competency as part of training, i.e. do they run a test or any physical part of running the test is practiced?
Yeah, so the Gene Drive Pro Forma and the way Gene Drive actually do their own face-to-face training, the advanced user would do a QC and a test, and there's a space on the sort of standard form for the label to be printed as well as evidence. So it is encouraged that the staff do a test and do a QC for that advanced user. Standard users would just do a test. But yes, it is ideal to be able to do a live test with everybody. That's not practical depending on the size of your ward. Where you've got over 100 staff, you're not going to do a test to train everybody to run a test. There has to be some sort of observation training in there as well. And obviously that's managed on the basis of how safe that is. But this happens all the time in lots of different areas where they do this for other training aspects of neonatal ward and nursing care and such like. So yeah, it'll be monitored, but with the test costs over £100, say business as usual, using one for training is you've got to weigh that up against your budget.
Amazing. We have another question here. What will be the frequency of user/staff training?
Frequency?
Yes.
So their access is 12 months. The frequency of it will depend of staff turnover. If you've got a large staff turnover, we know there's bank used in a lot of places as well. So you'll be training more often. If you've got a more static workforce, training frequency will be less. But if everything was static, you'd be trained once, and then 12 months later, you'd be looking to do some sort of retraining, recompetence, re-awareness check. Gene Drive's got quite a lot of online material that's quite useful. There's also YouTube videos that are broken down each step of the test, like point of view. So you can actually see it like you're wearing a headset almost. So it's a really good exposure, and I think those videos are going to come very useful to investigating where there's been failed tests, because there's a few fail points of the test, which could come immediately from taking the swab, and then not taking enough DNA. But yeah, there's lots of other pinch points I think that these videos could be useful in an investigation or troubleshooting.
Perfect. Okay. So there's another one here. Are there plans for connection to an IT middleware system? And what middleware do you use? Is it central controlled as in all Scotland, or separate depending on health board?
So there's no central national system yet, hopefully. I would like to have one, because it's more, it wouldn't be so currently all the connectivity software's in labs. Labs have it for different projects, and some labs have more than one because they've got blood gas on a separate contract, and that uses Acquire, and then they've got POCT for the main lab or something, so some boards have multiple connectivity software, and they'll use different ones. There's some similarities on boards because they use similar equipment, but generally there's multiple different ones. But what I foresee for a national connectivity solution, which I'm making a case for as well as the resource, is for all the point of care that'll come from community testing, and if things move further away from the secondary care where laboratories would be housed and where connection might be easier, because a lot of the existing connectivity software is physical server based, so that limits your connection further out from that server base as well. But there are products on the market now that are web hosted, and we know some of the manufacturers that have a physical server based connectivity software are now moving onto web hosted as well. So that opens up the opportunities for national connectivity more. But I would certainly be focused on the new point of care services that are coming, rather than what existing labs have, because you can imagine that's already tied into managed service contracts and different timescales for all of them. But I think there's a role for a national connectivity, yeah, but we don't have that.
Amazing, thank you. I'm sure that's really helpful. There's another question here. How did you obtain clinical advocacy at a national level for the implementation? Is there a national clinical lead, or was this achieved at all sites locally? Which committee made the final decision?
Yeah, so part of it was the landscaping. There's like most professional groups, there is groups in Scotland for neonatal care, neonatologists, they all know each other and know the work that's going on. So there's groups like that where this was advertised as such, but the landscaping was really where they got the clinical buy-in from each site to say, are you happy to take this test? And then obviously the ratification from the chief executive as well had to be part of that equation. But clinically, yes, there was a general acceptance. There was some, and still some, clinicians that have some dubiety over the test probably because there's lots of other tests they would like to have too. And sometimes the strapline of saving, the gene variants 1 in 500 that's widely quoted. There's probably lots of other tests that the consultants and neonatal staff would rather have in rather than this one. But in general, there was a wide acceptance of this, and I think encouraging from the current sites that have went live, they're actually testing more. Because so that kind of says it all for me. Once they've got the test, and we see this with other point of care tests too. Once they've got it, they actually probably use it more than they expected to. So
Amazing, thank you. Another question here. Funding for the project is 12 months. Are you concerned that central funding will not be available to continue the service in the future?
yeah, absolutely, that's definitely a concern. I don't think any of the NHS services feel they could probably say that will be continued after 12 months, guaranteed. Obviously, having the chief executive buy-in and the way the project's approved goes a long way because they've kind of accepted business as usual already, because they've had the business as usual costs estimated ahead of time just for testing though. The resource wasn't included in that, but they do have that, so there's sort of an approval, but we know finance could change. We've got an election in May this year. Who knows what could happen after that? But yes, at the minute, each board could have some comfort, but I think the level of testing that will be proposed will be more than what was in the original business as usual costs. Because I think most centres will want to test all babies that come through neonatal or children's wards.
Okay, thank you. We have another one here. It says, thank you, Ryan, for a great presentation. Given the scale of the project and the multiple stakeholders involved, how did you achieve consensus of thought around approach, process, and ongoing governance?
It's just a mixture of groups, really. So I mentioned the National Point of Care Steering Group there as well. So most of them have got a laboratory background and diagnostic background, who have widened the stakeholders. So things were discussed through there too, things were raised, other people's opinions were taken at that group. There's board meetings, so there's a governance structure for the project. So it's got a delivery group, a board meeting, two main groups that feature. So there's representatives from each health board on this as well. There's senior responsible officers, SROs from each board. So we had lots of visibility of this early, I think. So none of it should be a surprise. Everybody's had an input to the system. I created the documents based on the process that we were going to a site that did not have any laboratory input at all. So I went with the worst case scenario where there was no resource to help the neonatal ward, and I created documents to help that. So quite a lot of manual appendices as well for manual records. I think in practice they probably won't be used now that we've got the function to extract the data. All the sort of information you'd record manually is in the machine, so if we're extracting that, there's no need to duplicate, I don't think, a lot of cases, but there's a appendix for EQA monitoring, for instance, so they might want to use that, but it's just try to create a system that gives them choice, but it's not, I don't have the power to say you must use it. That's probably and it might be another question other people had about the governance. I've created this, I don't have the power to say they've got to use it.
Amazing. Okay, thank you. I can see two more here unless any more come through. So we've got, are we going to ensure that all POCT devices are being operated and maintained in line with UCAS ISO 15189-2022 standards?
Certainly, that's most of the people that know me know that's what runs through my brain anyway. So when I've created the document structure that's to that, the recent change notification that's just come in for a element of a test kit, the license buffer, that's also going through what I would term as an ISO 15189 compliant process. So yes, it's about doing that. We don't have any point of care accredited in Scotland, as far as I'm aware. That's for lots of reasons. It's not that the systems are not compliant that are out there. There's cost involved, but certainly if I'm designing anything, I always refer to 15189. Yeah. And when I'm in a place in person, I'm auditing it like it's 15189 too. So I can't switch off that.
Amazing, thank you. And I can see just one more question here. It says, great presentation and impressive project. From a national and local point of view, who owns the risk if there is a serious incident relating to use of the device, e.g. patient mismatch leading to adverse outcome, especially in the absence of IT connectivity?
Yeah, so the responsibility does lie locally. So the clinical leads locally, and that's I mentioned throughout the project, the presentation there, that the clinical governance is still devolved to each health board. So there's local reporting routes, whether it be adverse event management or term of that ilk. Any adverse event would be reported through that. So there's when each site's agreed to take the test on, that clinical ownership, that clinical oversight's there, whether it be clinical and managerial, or just the clinical consultant saying, I'll take responsibility for it. But yeah, it's the same way that if they mixed up a test, sending it to the lab for some other test, you know.
Amazing. So I think as far as I can see, oh, maybe there's one more question. When will you be able to publish the economic model?
The economic model. I'm not sure what that would mean. As far as
How
what
much
we've tested.
how
Yeah,
much
like
it will cost?
oh yeah, so a bit of an economic impact model. It would certainly be in the benefits realization, so that final part of the project gates and gateways. It'll round up over the 18-month project, how many babies were tested, how many babies, because the KPIs for government, sorry, just articulating my answer. The government KPIs include that, how many tests have been done, how many genes have been detected, how many babies have been detected with the gene, and then also how many babies have had their antibiotic treatment changed. And that's a similar KPI for the CYP2C19, because as some of you may be aware, that's more people will have their drug regime changed from that test compared to the MTNR1. But yeah, that benefits realization. But the good thing about this national one, I didn't mention it through the presentation because it's a lot different to general innovation projects that I've been part of. Having the national, excuse me, the national approach, there's national comms teams around this as well. So you may have seen some of the things from NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde when we implemented there. I was filmed for TV, the other clinician was filmed for TV and things. So that's going to happen throughout. So there'll be lots of that released, and there's stop gaps along the way to, celebrate or showcase the first patient that's positive, etc. So yeah, there's lots of things like that along the way.
Perfect. The same person has also said, when will it be available so we can be prepared in other areas to use it as evidence?
Yeah, so I think that full model, they'll just do a national one. It'll be in that benefits realization. So the project officially ends April 27. And so that's the end of the 18 months. So I'd expect some point shortly after that. Yeah.
Okay.
Once the Garda starts. Hoping by the end of that summer, potentially. I'm not sure how long that would take to create, because we will have all the data, but yeah.
Perfect. Well, I think, unless anyone has any last minute questions, that is all we have. Again, just a huge thank you to Ryan for delivering such an interesting webinar. I hope that everyone found it very useful.